It begins in silence, not the absence of sound, but the kind of stillness that falls when the heart pauses to listen. In that quiet, you might notice a strange pull, as if something beyond your everyday thoughts is calling you. It doesn't shout. It never forces. It whispers. You've heard it before, though perhaps you called it by another name. A flash of inspiration, a deep intuition, an unshakable sense that your life has a greater purpose than the sum of your routines. It is the same whisper that stirred the first humans to gaze at the stars and wonder, why am I here? It is the same inner voice that pushed explorers across oceans and scientists into the unknown. And it is the same quiet invitation that now draws you to these pages. We live in an age where information pours into our minds in endless streams, yet meaning seems more elusive than ever. Science has mapped the galaxies and split the atom, yet it cannot tell us what our existence is for. Religion has preserved ancient truths, yet in many hearts, the language of doctrine has grown cold. Somewhere between the microscope and the prayer, between the laboratory and the sanctuary, a vast territory remains unexplored. This book is an expedition into that very territory, the meeting ground between what we can measure and what we can only feel. The Urantia Book, a work both profound and mysterious, offers one of the most audacious visions of this meeting point. It does not simply describe a universe. It invites us to see it as alive, a vast organism in which every consciousness is both a unique spark and a part of the whole. In its cosmology, mind is not an accident of matter, but an intentional design. Consciousness is not a glitch in the brain, but a bridge between the human and the divine. Here, you're not a spectator in a meaningless cosmic theater. You are a co-author of a living story that began before time and will continue beyond the reach of death. This journey will take us across the great landscapes of human thought, through the delicate equations of quantum physics, the layered maps of psychology, the soaring visions of philosophy, and the deep rivers of mysticism. We will meet thinkers you may never have heard of, but whose insights shine like hidden constellations in the sky of human history. Each chapter is a step deeper into the question that has always defined us. What is consciousness? And what is it for? The path ahead will challenge what you think you know, inspire new ways of seeing, and perhaps awaken something ancient within you. And when you are ready, we will begin with the first step, listening to the whispers from the infinite. Chapter 1. Whispers from the Infinite. Long before the written word, before cities or kingdoms, or even the notion of history itself, human beings were already gazing into the dark sky and sensing that they were not alone. Deep in caves, by the flicker of firelight, hands reached up to paint on stone not merely what was seen, but what was felt. The bison and the deer etched into the walls of Lascaux and Altamira are not just records of the hunt. They are silent prayers, living symbols of an unspoken dialogue between the seen and the unseen. The arrangement of lines, the rhythm of dots, the hidden chambers where the images were placed. All of it suggests an awareness that life moved in layers, and that the visible was only the surface of a deeper reality. These were not merely decorations. They were acts of participation in a greater order, offerings to forces they sensed but could not name. In the smoke of ritual fires, in the rhythm of drums echoing against stone, the first shamans stood at the threshold between worlds. Their eyes were trained not just on the land, but on the spaces between moments, the gaps where visions and dreams entered. They returned to their tribes, carrying stories not learned through observation alone, but through journeys within. Whether they called it the Great Spirit, the Mother of all things, or simply the mystery, they shared one truth. There is a presence woven into existence itself, and we are meant to be in relationship with it. This was not an idea to be debated. It was as real to them as the earth beneath their feet. And perhaps this is why, even today, we feel an ancient ache when we look at the stars. The pattern carved into the constellations is not just a scattering of light. It is a mirror of something within us. That ache is the whisper. It is the same that spoke to the artist painting in darkness 20,000 years ago, the same that filled the heart of the desert mystic in prayer, the same that now stirs in you as your eyes move across these words. Across cultures and centuries, this awareness persists, surviving every revolution, every empire, every loss. It is not bound by religion or philosophy. It is the quiet pulse that tells us, even when we are lost, that we belong to something vast, intelligent, and deeply personal. Some have heard that whisper so clearly that it transformed the course of their lives, pulling them away from the familiar and into the unknown. Jacob Boehme, a simple shoemaker in 17th century Germany, saw the universe open before him in a beam of reflected sunlight. That moment, impossible to explain in the language of his time, became the fountain from which his writings poured. Visions of divine order unfolding through all things, a living interplay of light and darkness, purpose and mystery. Centuries later, Gurdjieff wandered through deserts and mountains in search of what he called real knowledge, returning to teach that human beings live in a kind of waking sleep, and that the first task is to awaken to the presence that is always here. And long before them both, Ibn Arabi, the great Sufi mystic, wrote of the breath of the merciful, the divine outpouring that renews the world in every instant. These are not abstract theorists. They were explorers of the inner cosmos, mapping its contours through direct experience. The Urantia Book, with its vast and intricate vision, speaks in harmony with these mystics, yet extends their vision further still. It describes the thought adjuster, a fragment of divine spirit, dwelling within each person, patiently guiding us toward a destiny we can scarcely imagine. Unlike the impersonal forces described by some traditions, this presence is deeply intimate, working moment by moment to shape our perceptions, to align our will with the greater will of the universe. It does not override our freedom, but waits, speaking in impressions, insights, and sudden clarity. To those attuned to it, the adjuster becomes a constant companion, a living proof that we are never truly alone, no matter how far we feel from the sacred. Modern psychology, though clothed in the language of research and theory, has begun to circle back toward these same truths. Abraham Maslow called it the peak experience, those moments when one feels at once intensely alive and perfectly at home in the universe. Viktor Frankl, writing from the shadow of the concentration camps, spoke of the irreducible human freedom to choose one's attitude, even in the face of unspeakable suffering, and of the profound meaning that can emerge when life is aligned with something greater than the self. Both men understood that transcendence is not a luxury for the few, but a deep human need, a compass pointing us beyond survival towards significance. This thread, stretching from the caves of our ancestors through the lives of mystics into the insights of modern psychology, is unbroken. It tells us that the longing you feel, the subtle presence you sense, is not an illusion or a relic of a primitive mind. It is the deepest truth of who you are. The whisper is not the voice of fantasy. It is the call of your own highest reality, a reminder that your life is part of a pattern so immense it can never be fully seen from within it. The Urantia Book invites us to imagine this pattern not as a distant blueprint, but as a living, unfolding creation, a story in which the universe itself is conscious and you are both character and co-author. This vision is not meant to be admired from afar. It is meant to be lived, breathed, and acted upon. But to live it requires more than belief. It requires a posture of listening, the courage to act when inner clarity comes, and the humility to recognize that our understanding will always be partial. The mystics knew this, which is why their writings often read like invitations rather than instructions. Maslow and Frankl knew this too, framing transcendence not as escape from reality, but as a fuller engagement with it. And the prehistoric artist, kneeling in the dark with pigment-stained hands, knew it without naming it. That to make contact with the infinite, you must first offer something of yourself. The question before us, then, is not whether the infinite whispers. It always has and always will, but whether we will learn to listen with the same devotion as those who came before us. In the chapters ahead, we will explore the science of that wonder, the mechanics of awe, and the way modern discoveries are bringing us closer than ever to understanding the deep structure of reality. For if the whisper is the invitation, then wonder is the doorway. And it is through that doorway that we now step. Chapter 2, The Science of Wonder. Wonder begins as a pause, a sudden widening of perception, when a world reveals itself as more than we assumed. It can be as small as the intricate pattern in a snowflake melting in your hand, or as vast as the realization that the stars overhead are not fixed lights but suns, each with their own worlds, perhaps their own forms of life. This pause is not passive. It is charged, electric, filled with questions that pull the mind beyond its habitual boundaries. Wonder rearranges the familiar. It turns the ordinary into an open door. And in that moment of openness, something changes. We become participants rather than spectators, engaged with reality in a way that transforms both ourselves and what we see. Modern physics has stumbled upon this same truth, though it dresses it in the language of mathematics and experiment. In the quantum realm, the act of observation is not neutral. The observer effect, the strange fact that the outcome of an experiment can be influenced simply by the act of measurement, challenges the old assumption that reality exists in a fixed state, independent of us. Instead, it hints that consciousness is somehow entangled with the fabric of the physical world, that our attention is not just a passive lens, but an active ingredient. This does not mean we create reality out of nothing, but that reality, at its most fundamental level, is responsive. And if the universe responds, then perhaps our sense of wonder is not merely an emotional reaction, but a signal of our deeper role in the unfolding of the cosmos. Neuroscience offers its own lens on this. When we encounter something that triggers awe, a sweeping landscape, a sudden insight, a profound work of art, the brain shifts into a unique mode. Activity in the default mode network, which supports our sense of self, quiets down, while networks associated with sensory integration and openness to experience light up. In altered states brought on by meditation, deep prayer, or even certain psychedelic compounds, similar patterns emerge. The boundaries between self and world blur, time stretches or dissolves, and a deep interconnectedness becomes not just an idea, but a felt reality. It is as if the brain, momentarily freed from its constant self-referencing, remembers its place within something larger. This, too, is science brushing against the infinite, catching in its instruments a glimpse of the same vastness that mystics have always described. If we look back across the long arc of human history, wonder is not just an ornament of consciousness. It has been a force of evolution. Our earliest ancestors who lifted their gaze to the night sky did more than admire its beauty. They began to imagine, to speculate, to map patterns, and tell stories. These acts were seeds of abstraction, the beginnings of mathematics, navigation, and the frameworks of myth. The spark of curiosity that drove them to test the properties of fire or to follow the migrations of animals was the same impulse that would one day lead us to send probes beyond our solar system. Wonder compels us to go beyond what is necessary for survival, pushing us to explore the possible. Without it, our species might have remained clever animals, confined to familiar territories. With it, we became architects of civilizations, builders of meaning, seekers of truth. The Urantia Book describes human evolution not only in terms of biology, but as a progressive unfolding of mind toward higher forms of awareness. It suggests that the drive to explore, to question, and to seek connection with the unseen is not incidental. It is part of an intentional design, an embedded signal guiding us towards spiritual maturity. In this view, wonder is not a byproduct of an oversized brain. It is a compass pointing us toward realities that the senses alone cannot capture. This aligns with the findings of anthropology and cognitive science, which show that societies with rich traditions of storytelling, exploration, and spiritual practice often demonstrate greater adaptability, creativity, and resilience. Wonder widens the map of what we believe is possible, and in doing so, it widens the scope of what actually becomes possible. Even on the individual level, the moments that shape our lives most deeply are often those sparked by awe. We remember the first time we stood before the ocean or heard a piece of music that seemed to open a door inside us. Such moments recalibrate our priorities. They reveal that there is more to life than accumulation or survival. Henri Bergson, a philosopher too often overlooked today, called this animating force the elan vital, the vital impulse, a creative current that moves through all living things, urging them toward greater complexity, beauty, and expression. For Bergson, this impulse was not mechanical. It was life's longing to transcend itself, to evolve not just physically, but in consciousness. Wonder, in this light, is both the symptom and the fuel of that upward movement. When we see wonder in this way, as a bridge between the deepest structure of reality and our own unfolding awareness, it stops being a fleeting mood and becomes a practice. To live with wonder is to keep the doors of perception unlocked, to meet the familiar with the same curiosity we grant the unfamiliar. It is to acknowledge that the universe is not a static stage on which life plays, but a living field in which every act of attention shapes the next moment. The observer effect in quantum mechanics becomes less a strange anomaly and more a poetic reminder. The way we look at the world changes what the world becomes. Neuroscience confirms that this openness rewires our brains, strengthening our capacity for empathy, creativity, and meaning-making. Evolution shows us that such openness has always been our greatest advantage. And philosophers like Bergson remind us that behind all this is a current of life that refuses to remain still. This current has no final destination in sight, only an unending invitation to grow. We sense it when we stand before a landscape that dwarfs us, when we read a sentence that feels like it was written for us alone, when we realize that even our smallest gestures ripple out into a larger whole. In these moments, the boundaries between science and spirituality blur. We are not required to choose between the language of equations and the language of prayer. Both are attempts to articulate the same reality from different angles. Wonder is the common ground on which they meet, a meeting place where the mind's hunger for understanding and the soul's longing for communion become one and the same. And yet, To speak of wonder without exploring its home would be incomplete. For if wonder is the doorway, the living universe itself is the vast and mysterious room into which that doorway opens. The next step in our journey is to walk fully into that space, to consider a cosmos that is not merely a collection of objects and forces, but an organism aware and evolving, in which each of us is a vital and irreplaceable cell. Chapter 3: The Living Universe. To step through the doorway of wonder is to find ourselves in a universe that does not merely surround us, but includes us, shapes us, and perhaps even knows us. The ancient image of the cosmos as a cold, indifferent expanse begins to dissolve when we look closely, for the more deeply we study it, the more it begins to resemble a living system, vast beyond comprehension, yet strangely intimate. The Urantia Book offers a vision of this immensity through the concept of the master universe, a reality layered and organized far beyond the limits of human perception, extending from the worlds we know to outer regions still in the process of creation. It is a cosmos with architecture, with rhythm, with intention, a living body whose heartbeat is felt in the smallest particle and in the largest galactic supercluster. In this vision, the universes are not drifting accidents. They are parts of an expanding organism, an expression of divine will unfolding through time and space. Modern astrophysics, though it uses a different language, paints its own picture of an ordered, dynamic whole. From the searing birth of the Big Bang, a moment when space, time, energy, and the seeds of matter burst into being, to the delicate balance of forces that allow stars to form and planets to harbor life. The story is one of improbable precision. The values of fundamental constants, from the strength of gravity to the charge of the electron, seem fine-tuned to allow complexity to arise. Even the slightest variation would have rendered the cosmos sterile. For some, this precision is mere coincidence, the lucky outcome of a vast multiverse where most realities are lifeless. For others, it is a clue, perhaps even evidence, that the universe is not indifferent but purposive. It is as if the cosmos is predisposed toward life, toward awareness, toward the unfolding of minds capable of looking back upon it in awe. Philosophers have not been blind to this implication. In the late 19th century, the Russian thinker Nikolai Fedorov articulated a vision that would come to be called cosmism, the idea that the universe itself has a purpose and that humanity's role is to align with that purpose consciously. For Fedorov, the evolution of intelligence was not a byproduct of blind mechanics, but a call to active participation in the destiny of the cosmos. He imagined future generations taking part in the renewal and transformation of worlds, in a grand cooperation with the processes of nature and the divine. Though his language was shaped by his time, his insight resonates with modern notions of a participatory universe, where the development of life and consciousness is not an incidental feature, but a central thread woven into the very fabric of reality. If we see the universe as a living system rather than a mechanical stage, then life is not an isolated accident, but a natural flowering of its deeper structure. The chemistry of carbon, the stability of water, the energy of sunlight, these are not random alignments, but recurring patterns written into the cosmic code. Everywhere astronomers look, they find ingredients for life scattered with almost casual abundance. Amino acids in interstellar clouds, complex organic molecules on comets, entire oceans hidden beneath the icy crusts of distant moons. It is as if the universe cannot help but seed itself with the possibility of life, as if some principle woven into its foundations drives matter toward complexity, complexity toward awareness, and awareness toward self-reflection. The Urantia Book frames this in a language of intention, suggesting that the Creator has designed the cosmos as a vast garden, each world a unique setting in which the drama of life and spirit may unfold. Modern science, though careful to avoid metaphysical claims, has begun to echo this sense of inevitability. Astrobiology now works with the assumption that life will emerge wherever conditions allow, not as a rare miracle, but as a predictable outcome of natural laws. Some physicists go further, proposing that the universe is structured to maximize the emergence of complexity, not simply in terms of physical form, but in the richness of interaction, cooperation, and adaptation. The anthropic principle, controversial though it may be, forces us to consider why the laws of physics seem tailored to produce beings capable of asking these questions in the first place. Whether one attributes this to divine purpose, multiversal chance, or some as-yet unseen principle, the result is the same: a cosmos that behaves less like an inert machine and more like a fertile ecosystem. In this light, the evolution of life on Earth is not an isolated narrative, but a local chapter in a much larger story. The same currents that shaped our planet have been at work for billions of years in countless other places. The same balance of chaos and order, of accident and inevitability, drives the birth of stars and the birth of cells. Seen from this perspective, life does not appear as an intruder in a hostile universe, but as one of its native languages, perhaps even its native consciousness. If the cosmos is alive, then every heartbeat, every thought, every act of awareness is not merely personal, but cosmic in scale. And in recognizing this, we begin to understand that our individual lives are woven into a pattern so vast that even the farthest galaxies may be part of the same living pulse. When we begin to see ourselves as part of a living universe, the divisions between science and spirituality lose their hard edges. The Urantia Book's master universe becomes not merely a metaphysical speculation, but a lens through which the discoveries of modern astrophysics take on new depth and coherence. The fine-tuning of cosmic laws ceases to be a sterile puzzle and becomes the signature of an intelligence that works not in sudden intrusions, but in the very bones of creation. Fedorov's vision of human participation in cosmic purpose stops sounding like utopian poetry and begins to feel like an intuitive recognition of our true role. And the constant emergence of life in the most unlikely environments becomes a chorus of evidence that the cosmos itself is driven by the desire to know, to grow, to awaken. To live with this awareness is to shift from a position of detachment to one of responsibility. If the universe is alive, and if consciousness is one of its essential expressions, then our thoughts and actions are not isolated events, but contributions to the health of the whole. The way we treat our planet, the way we treat each other, even the way we cultivate our inner lives, reverberates far beyond the immediate moment. The living universe is not an abstraction. It is a community of which we are inseparably a part. To ignore, that is to live as if cut off from our own body. To embrace, it is to step into a role for which we have been evolving for eons, not as passive witnesses, but as co-creators in an unfolding masterpiece. And yet, to take up this role fully, we must understand more clearly the structure of the very instrument through which we perceive and participate, the mind. For if the universe is a living whole, then our consciousness is both its reflection and its bridge. In the next stage of our journey, we will turn our attention inward, tracing the architecture of mind from the neural patterns that sustain our daily thoughts to the mysterious dimensions where spirit and matter meet, and where the whisper of the infinite becomes a voice. Chapter 4: The Architecture of Mind. To understand our place in a living universe, we must understand the instrument through which we perceive it. The mind is not simply a private theater where reality plays out for an isolated observer. It is a living bridge, an interface between the physical and the spiritual, between the neural currents that shape our thoughts and the deeper currents of meaning that seem to come from beyond them. Neuroscience describes the mind in terms of electrical impulses and chemical exchanges, networks of neurons firing in patterns that give rise to perception, memory, and decision. Every image we see, every sound we hear, is not a direct imprint of the world, but a reconstruction, the brain stitching together signals into the coherent experience we call now. Yet, even in its precision, this model leaves something untouched, the felt reality of awareness, the inner presence that can observe its own workings. The Urantia Book offers a different but complementary perspective, portraying the mind as an active mediator between spirit and matter, a field of interaction where the divine can impress itself upon the human and where human choice can reach upward toward the divine. In this view, the mind is not reducible to the brain, though the brain is its necessary foundation in material life. It is a dynamic space in which the adjuster works, gently shaping our interpretations, nudging our reasoning toward truth, beauty, and goodness. This aligns in a subtle way with the observations of William James, the pioneering psychologist and philosopher who spoke of the stream of consciousness, a flowing, unbroken current of thought, sensation, and reflection. James saw consciousness as more than a byproduct of the brain's machinery. He saw it as a process intimately linked with experience, choice, and the possibility of transformation. The flow James described is not unlike a river that draws from multiple sources: sensory impressions from the body, memories from the past, anticipations of the future, and perhaps impulses from a higher origin. Carl Jung expanded this vision by exploring the deep channels beneath the surface of individual consciousness, the realm of archetypes and the collective unconscious. In Jung's model, the mind is not an isolated island, but a peninsula connected to a vast continent of shared symbols and patterns, a terrain where the myths of every culture and the dreams of every person share a common root. These archetypes are not mere abstractions. They are living forces that shape how we see ourselves and the world, moving within us like unseen architects of thought and feeling. To encounter them is to glimpse a layer of mind that belongs as much to humanity as to the individual. Seen through both scientific and spiritual lenses, the mind becomes less like a static object to be studied and more like a living system that is constantly reshaping itself in dialogue with the world. Neuroscience has shown us that our brains are not fixed but plastic, capable of rewiring in response to new experiences, thoughts, and intentions. Pathways strengthen or fade according to what we attend to, what we rehearse, what we value. Every memory we recall is subtly rewritten in the act of remembering, each decision influenced not only by logic but by emotion, intuition, and the stories we tell ourselves about who we are. In this constant flux, we can begin to see the mind not as a closed container, but as a porous membrane, open to influences from within and without, from the tangible and the intangible alike. The Urantia Book's portrayal of the mind as a mediator between spirit and matter finds an unexpected echo here. If the mind is this mutable, then it is an ideal medium for spiritual influence, not in the sense of overpowering control, but in the way a gardener works with the living soil, nurturing what is good and clearing what obstructs growth. The adjuster's quiet work in guiding our interpretations and inclinations becomes more plausible when we realize how many of our decisions begin in places deeper than conscious awareness. William James's stream of consciousness captures this sense of constant flow, But what if within that flow, there are currents that do not originate in us? What if some of the clarity we attribute to a sudden burst of insight is actually a resonance with a higher pattern, an alignment of our inner movement with the deeper architecture of the cosmos? Jung's vision of archetypes adds yet another layer. These recurring patterns, the wise elder, the shadow, the hero's journey, appear in every culture because they are structural elements of the human mind itself, inherited in the same way our bodies carry the genetic memory of evolution. But if these patterns are truly universal, then they may represent not just psychological tendencies, but something more, signposts in the shared terrain of the soul, markers of a collective design in which each person is a unique expression of a larger whole. When we encounter these symbols in dreams, myths, or even modern stories, we are engaging in an ancient conversation, one that may have begun before humanity as we know it came into being, and one that still whispers to us through the living architecture of the mind. To see the mind in this way is to recognize that it is neither purely mechanical nor purely mystical, but a meeting place, a dynamic threshold where matter and spirit interlace. The patterns of neural activity that define our perceptions are as real as the chemical composition of our blood, yet they're also shaped by stories, by symbols, by encounters with meaning that cannot be reduced to biology alone. The Urantia Book calls the mind the arena of choice, a space where we decide, moment by moment, whether to align ourselves with higher purposes or drift along the currents of habit and impulse. Neuroscience tells us that such choices leave physical imprints, altering the structure of the brain, while depth psychology reminds us that the unconscious is never silent, always offering both obstacles and allies to our conscious aims. In this interplay lies a profound responsibility. If the mind is a living bridge, then what we cultivate within it matters, not only for our own well-being, but for the quality of our participation in a larger reality. The thoughts we entertain, the symbols we embrace, the memories we nurture, and the truths we pursue all contribute to the tuning of this instrument. And because the mind is not sealed but connected to the collective unconscious, to the archetypal patterns, and perhaps even to the mind circuits described in Urantia, our personal cultivation resonates beyond the self. Each choice to listen for the whisper of the infinite, each act of reflection that seeks truth rather than comfort, strengthens not just the individual, but the web of consciousness we all share. But to explore the architecture of the mind is only the beginning. If this bridge exists, we must ask what it connects us to, and how the connection itself might arise from the deepest foundations of reality. In the next stage of our journey, we will descend into the quantum heart of things, exploring whether consciousness emerges from matter or whether matter itself may be rooted in consciousness, and how this question opens a doorway into the mystery of life, awareness, and the presence of spirit within the smallest structures of the cosmos. Chapter 5: Quantum Seeds of Awareness. If the mind is a bridge between spirit and matter, then it is natural to wonder what materials this bridge is made of, and whether they might reach deeper into the fabric of reality than we have imagined. For centuries, science has worked from the assumption that consciousness emerges from complex arrangements of matter, that neurons and synapses, when organized in just the right way, produce the experience of being. Yet in recent decades, certain observations in physics and biology have begun to challenge this one-way street. The more we study the smallest scales of nature, the more we encounter phenomena that resist the neat separation of observer and observed, of mind and matter. It is in this realm, the quantum world, that some scientists believe we may find the seeds of awareness itself. Among the boldest of these proposals is the orchestroir theory put forward by physicist Roger Penrose and anesthesiologist Stuart Hameroff. They suggest that consciousness may arise not from the firing of neurons as a whole, but from quantum processes within the microtubules, tiny structural components inside each neuron. In their model, the collapse of quantum states within these microtubules is orchestrated by a deeper level of reality, one that is non-computational and perhaps woven into the very geometry of space-time. This is not the mechanistic clockwork of classical physics. It is a domain where probability, potentiality, and awareness seem to intermingle. Whether one accepts their theory or not, its implications are staggering. If true, consciousness is not merely something the brain does. It is something the universe does, with the brain acting as a resonant instrument tuned to this deeper field. The idea that quantum coherence might play a role in living systems is no longer confined to the fringes. Biologists have found evidence of quantum effects in places where they once seemed impossible. In a near-perfect efficiency of photosynthesis, where energy moves through plant cells in waves that explore multiple paths at once. In the uncanny navigation of migratory birds, whose sense of direction appears to rely on quantum entanglement in their retinal proteins, even in the subtle chemistry of enzymes, where reactions occur at speeds that defy classical explanation. These are not mystical claims, but measurable phenomena, hinting that life may not simply tolerate quantum processes, but may in fact depend on them. And if life, at its foundation, already engages with the quantum realm, then perhaps consciousness, the most complex and mysterious expression of life, is rooted there as well. The Urantia Book speaks of mind circuits that operate beyond the limits of the material brain, suggesting that thought, perception, and even spiritual insight flow through channels not confined to the machinery of neurons. In this view, the brain is a local processor, a necessary anchor for our material experience. But the mind itself draws upon fields that extend into non-physical dimensions. These circuits connect us to broader networks of consciousness, personal, planetary, and universal. And it is through them that the adjuster can work, infusing the stream of thought with impressions and impulses that point us toward truth. What modern science is beginning to observe in quantum biology could be the first faint measurement of such non-local connections. Evidence that the mind's reach may not end at the skull, but might be braided into the larger architecture of the cosmos. If consciousness is indeed rooted in quantum processes, then the question becomes more profound. Do those processes depend on life to occur, or is life itself an expression of something already present in the fabric of reality? The possibility that awareness is a fundamental property of the universe, as intrinsic as mass or charge, is not new, but it is gaining renewed attention. Physicists and philosophers alike have begun to entertain models of panpsychism, in which consciousness, in some form, pervades all matter. In this picture, the brain does not create awareness out of nothing. It organizes, amplifies, and focuses what is already there. The implications are spiritual as much as they are scientific. It means that our capacity to think, to love, to imagine is not an isolated accident, but the flowering of a principle that exists wherever reality exists. Such a view reframes our understanding of the observer effect in quantum mechanics. If the act of observation shapes what is observed, and if awareness is woven into the fabric of existence, then the cosmos is engaged in a perpetual act of self-discovery. Each conscious being becomes a vantage point from which the universe experiences itself, and each act of perception contributes to the unfolding of reality. The Urantia Book's assertion that personality is unique and irreplaceable gains a deeper resonance here. If every observer is a facet of a universal mind, then each of us holds a perspective that can never be duplicated. The living universe, in this sense, requires us, not just as spectators, but as essential participants in the grand experiment of creation. If consciousness is a seed embedded in the quantum fabric of reality, then the mind is not an isolated island, but part of an ocean whose waves move through every point in space and time. The microtubules in our neurons, the photons striking a leaf, the entangled particles guiding a bird across continents, all may be different expressions of the same underlying principle. In such a view, the work of spiritual growth is not about importing divinity from somewhere else, but about tuning the instrument of the self so it can resonate more clearly with what has always been present. The Urantia Book's description of mind as a mediator, open to currents from higher sources, becomes more than a metaphor. It becomes a potential bridge between what we observe in the lab and what we experience in the depths of meditation or prayer. The spiritual implications are immense. If awareness pervades the universe, then every moment of conscious choice carries weight beyond what we can measure. To direct our attention toward compassion, toward beauty, toward truth, is to align ourselves with the deeper current shaping reality. This is not mysticism divorced from fact. It is a recognition that the boundaries between science and spirituality are thinner than we once thought. The same field that carries our thoughts may also carry the quiet impressions of guidance, the sudden clarity of insight, the mysterious pull toward what is good. In this way, quantum consciousness is not just a theory about the origins of mind. It is an invitation to live as if every act of awareness is a sacred act, contributing to the unfolding of the whole. But to follow this invitation, we must know how to navigate the subtle voice within, the compass that points us toward the next step when the path is unclear. This compass is not built of equations or neural pathways alone. It is shaped by values, by intuition, by the mysterious collaboration between human will and divine leading. In the next chapter, we will turn our attention to this inner guidance, exploring how the thought adjuster, moral intuition, and the quiet practice of listening can orient our lives toward a truth that is both timeless and deeply personal. Chapter 6, The Inner Compass. There comes a point in the search for truth when all the outer maps, the theories, and the great cosmic architectures lead us inward. For all the vastness of the universe, for all the intricate interplay of quantum fields and galactic structures, the next step in our journey cannot be taken by telescope or particle accelerator. It is taken in stillness. Here, within the private theater of thought and feeling, something waits, not as an abstract principle, but as a living presence. The Urantia Book names it the thought adjuster, a fragment of the divine indwelling each mind, patiently shaping the inner life toward its highest potential. Unlike the forces that move planets or the laws that govern atoms, this guidance does not act upon us from the outside. It works from within, often so subtly that we mistake its influence for our own thoughts or for the quiet voice of conscience we have always known. Modern psychology, though using a different vocabulary, has begun to describe a similar phenomenon in its studies of moral intuition. Researchers find that our ethical decisions often emerge not from deliberate calculation, but from an immediate sense of rightness or wrongness that precedes conscious reasoning. This is not irrationality, but a different mode of knowing, a swift integration of memory, empathy, and value that gives direction before the mind can build its arguments. Neuroscience traces this to the interplay between emotional centers in the brain and the prefrontal regions where higher judgment resides. But this mapping cannot fully explain the origins of the moral impulse itself. Why does a person in danger stir us to action, even when it costs us? Why does an act of cruelty toward a stranger offend something deep inside us? The Urantia perspective would say that the adjuster is at work here, gently aligning our responses with a greater pattern, whispering reminders of the good we are meant to embody. Mystical traditions across cultures recognize this inner compass, even if they describe it in other terms. The Quakers speak of the inner light, an unmediated experience of divine truth accessible to all who wait in stillness. Sufis call it the eye of the heart, the capacity to perceive what cannot be seen with ordinary sight. Hindu teachings speak of the Antaryman, the indwelling guide who watches over and directs the soul's journey. In each case, the essential idea is the same, that there is within us a source of wisdom which is not constructed by the mind, but which the mind can learn to hear. And though the language varies, the method for hearing it is remarkably consistent. A quieting of the noise, a withdrawal from the compulsive motion of thought, and a turning toward the subtle impressions that rise in silence. Stillness is not merely the absence of sound or movement. It is a state in which the restless machinery of thought loosens its grip and space opens for something older and wiser to emerge. In our usual mode of living, the mind is a ceaseless commentator, anticipating, evaluating, remembering, a stream of inner noise so constant that we forget it is there. In such conditions, the voice of the inner compass is easily drowned out, not because it is too faint to be heard, but because we are too busy listening to ourselves. Practices like meditation, contemplative prayer, or even mindful walking are ways of creating an inner clearing, where the habitual chatter quiets and the more subtle impressions can make themselves known. Science confirms the transformative effects of these practices. Meditation changes the structure of the brain, thickening areas associated with attention, emotional regulation, and compassion, while reducing activity in networks linked to self-centered rumination. From a Urantia Book's point of view, this is precisely the kind of mental environment in which the thought adjuster can work most effectively. Just as a seed germinates in undisturbed soil, the seeds of divine insight flourish in a mind that has made room for them. Stillness does not force the adjuster to speak. It simply makes us more capable of hearing. And what we hear is not usually a booming directive, but a nudge, a sense of alignment, a clarity about the next right step. Often, it comes with the unmistakable quality of peace, even when it calls us to do something difficult. In such moments, psychological research into decision-making converges with a mystical path. Both recognize that the most transformative choices often arise from a kind of knowing that precedes the conscious weighing of pros and cons. This is not to suggest that reason has no role in guidance. Rather, reason becomes a partner to the inner compass, testing and refining the initial sense of direction. The interplay is delicate. The intuitive flash provides the seed of action, and reason shapes it into something that can be lived out in the world. When we are attentive, we notice that these intuitions often carry a consistency over time, as though they originate from a source that sees further than we can. Across cultures and centuries, those who have learned to trust this guidance describe it as deeply personal and yet somehow universal, a voice that knows us better than we know ourselves, and yet speaks in the language of our own experience. To live by the inner compass is to accept that guidance is a relationship rather than a set of fixed instructions. The thought adjuster does not hand us a completed map. It walks beside us as we chart the terrain together, revealing the way forward in proportion to our willingness to move. Moral intuition becomes more refined with practice, just as a musician's ear grows more sensitive with years of listening. Each time we respond to that quiet prompting, choosing compassion over indifference, truth over convenience, courage over fear. We tune the instrument of the mind to better catch its subtle harmonics. Over time, what once seemed like rare moments of inspiration can become a steady undercurrent, a presence that shapes not just our decisions but the entire tone of our lives. Stillness remains the discipline that keeps this channel clear. In stillness, we remember that we are not merely actors improvising in an indifferent universe, but participants in a dialogue that began before our birth and will continue after our final breath. This is why the great mystics so often speak in terms of friendship with the divine, of companionship rather than command. The inner compass does not drag us forward, it invites us. It does not override our freedom, it honors it. It works in the quiet spaces where we can choose to align with a will larger than our own without losing the uniqueness of who we are. This is the paradox at the heart of guidance. The more deeply we surrender to it, the more fully we become ourselves. And yet, if this compass is real, it is not meant for private benefit alone. Its bearings are aligned with the greater good. And to follow, it is to enter into a web of relationships, human and divine, that stretches across the world and perhaps the universe itself. In the chapters ahead, we will widen our lens from the individual to the collective, exploring how consciousness may not be confined to a single mind, but may join with others to create fields of awareness that shape history, culture, and even the evolution of the soul. For if we each carry a spark of the infinite within, then together we may form something far greater, a shared flame, illuminating paths none of us could walk alone. Chapter 7: Shadows and the Light. Every path toward greater awareness eventually passes through terrain we would rather avoid. It is tempting to imagine that spiritual growth is an upward climb through ever brighter landscapes, but the truth is more complex. Light, by its very nature, casts shadows, and in the search for truth, we inevitably encounter parts of ourselves and our world that we have kept hidden. Carl Jung called these unacknowledged aspects the shadow, the traits, desires, and impulses we deny or suppress because they do not fit the image we wish to present to ourselves or to others. Yet the shadow does not vanish when ignored. It works in subtler ways, shaping our fears, our judgments, and even our spiritual aspirations. In fact, one of the most dangerous forms of the shadow is when it wears the mask of light, using the language of truth and goodness to defend what is false or self-serving. The spiritual journey is particularly vulnerable to this kind of distortion. When the desire to grow becomes entangled with the desire to be seen as enlightened, we can mistake self-image for transformation. The Urantia Book warns of this in its reflections on rebellion and spiritual immaturity, describing how beings, both human and celestial, can turn away from the greater while convincing themselves they are moving toward it. Pride, fear, resentment, all can cloak themselves in righteous conviction, making the false path feel indistinguishable from the true. This is why genuine growth so often demands a confrontation with our own capacity for self-deception, a willingness to see how even noble intentions can be corrupted when they serve the ego rather than the soul. Yet it is in facing these shadows that the most profound transformation becomes possible. Jung understood that integrating the shadow, bringing its contents into the light of awareness, does not mean indulging destructive impulses, but recognizing them as part of the whole self. What we disown gains power over us. What we acknowledge can be transformed. The same principle applies in the spiritual realm. To see clearly where we have resisted guidance, where we have clung to illusions, is to create the first opening for grace to enter. But this is not an easy process. It requires honesty without self-condemnation, humility without despair. It requires, above all, the courage to stand in the light long enough for the shadows to reveal themselves fully. Spiritual deception is rarely a sudden, obvious collapse into falsehood. It more often begins with small compromises in clarity, subtle turns of thought that seem harmless until they become habit. We justify actions that contradict our values, reinterpret inconvenient truths until they fit our comfort, and sometimes even use sacred language to shield us from necessary change. In the Urantia Book, rebellion is portrayed not simply as disobedience to divine will, but as a gradual withdrawal of trust, an insistence on self-determination without reference to the larger order of reality. This withdrawal can happen quietly in the human soul, just as it can happen on cosmic scales, and in both cases its root is the same: a refusal to align our freedom with the truth that gives it meaning. Such misalignment feeds immaturity, the tendency to choose what is immediately satisfying over what leads to long-term growth. Yet paradoxically, it is often when our illusions begin to fail us that the ground becomes fertile for deeper transformation. Suffering has a way of stripping away the pretenses that keep us from seeing clearly. When we face loss, betrayal, or the collapse of something we thought secure, we're forced into a confrontation with reality as it is, not as we wish it to be. In this sense, suffering can act as a refining fire, burning away what is false and leaving behind what is essential. Many of the most enduring spiritual transformations arise not from moments of triumph, but from seasons of difficulty, times when the old ways of thinking and living no longer work, and something within us must die so that something greater can live. Jungian psychology mirrors this understanding in its view of shadow integration. When we encounter aspects of ourselves that we have denied, it is often uncomfortable, even painful. But by facing these parts honestly, we release their hold over us and recover the energy they have been draining. The same holds true in the spiritual domain. By admitting our susceptibility to pride, fear, or self-deception, we allow divine grace to work in places we once kept closed. In the paradoxical way of spiritual growth, rebellion can teach obedience, and suffering can teach joy. Not because pain is inherently good, but because it can open doors that comfort leaves shut. The shadows we carry are not signs of failure. They're evidence that we are still in motion, still being shaped. The Urantia Book reminds us that even in the universe's highest realms, beings can stumble, and yet the divine plan bends always toward restoration. What matters is not the absence of error, but the willingness to turn again toward the light when we become aware of it. The journey through darkness is not a detour from the path. It is part of the path, for only by seeing what is hidden can we become whole. Every confrontation with our shadow, every dismantling of a cherished illusion, is an invitation to choose again, this time with greater clarity and humility. Transformation through suffering is not about glorifying pain, but about recognizing its potential to clear space for something more enduring. The people who emerge most radiant are often those who have walked through loss or failure and discovered in themselves a depth of compassion they could not have imagined before. Their light is not untouched by shadow. It is informed by it, deepened by it, strengthened by it. In this way, the obstacles to spiritual growth become their own teachers, pointing us back to the truth that the soul's expansion is often inseparable from its trials. The rebellion within can be met with reconciliation. The immaturity of the spirit can mature in the soil of patience, surrender, and love. Yet no one navigates these depths alone. Just as the individual mind is part of a larger web of consciousness, so too the work of integrating the shadow is aided by the presence of others, mentors, friends, companions whose light helps us remember our own when we are lost in darkness. In the next stage of our journey, we will look outward again, exploring the bonds that unite souls across time and space, the unseen threads of influence and connection that make each personal awakening part of a collective unfolding. For even in our most solitary struggles, we are never truly alone. Chapter 8, The Language of Symbols. Every culture, from the most ancient to the most modern, has spoken in a language older than words. Before alphabets, before recorded history, human beings told their truths in images: a spiral carved into stone, a serpent coiled around a staff, a sun rising between two mountains. These symbols are more than decoration. They are vessels, carrying meaning across centuries and continents, surviving the fall of civilizations and the transformation of languages. Carl Jung understood that such images are not random creations of the human mind, but expressions of archetypes, universal patterns of thought and experience that arise from the collective unconscious. They appear in dreams, in myths, in works of art, and in the rituals of cultures that never had contact with one another, as if humanity shares a deep, unseen library from which we all draw. The Urantia Book participates in this ancient language, though it often clothes its truths in terms unique to its cosmology. The very image of the master universe, with its concentric levels and expanding realms of creation, is itself symbolic, inviting the mind to contemplate not just the scale of reality, but its layered structure and living unity. Likewise, the descriptions of thought adjusters, mind circuits, and the eternal ascent of the soul are not only doctrinal statements. They are metaphors in the deepest sense, bridges between what can be experienced and what cannot be fully explained. Gnostic texts, too, abound in this kind of symbolic richness. The journey through eons, the struggle between light and darkness, the quest for the hidden spark within. Even when stripped of their theological frameworks, these stories remain potent because they speak directly to something beyond the rational mind, something that recognizes truth in form as well as in fact. Semiotics, the study of signs and symbols, helps us understand why this language is so enduring. A symbol is not simply a stand-in for something else. It shapes our perception of the thing it represents. The image of a tree as the axis between heaven and earth does not merely describe the world. It invites us to see the world as connected, layered, alive. In this way, symbols are not just conveyors of meaning. They are creators of meaning. They are part of the mind's architecture, allowing abstract truths to be grasped in concrete form. The mystical traditions understand this instinctively. They use metaphor and image not to obscure truth, but to open it, to slip past the defenses of literal thought and awaken recognition in the soul. The power of a symbol lies in its ability to hold multiple layers of meaning at once. On the surface, it can be grasped quickly, intuitively. Yet beneath that surface, it invites a lifetime of reflection. A single image, the lotus blooming above the mud, the pilgrim's winding path up a mountain, the circle with no beginning or end, can speak to the child and the sage in the same breath. This is because symbols operate in both the conscious and unconscious mind. Psychologically, they bypass the narrow gates of analytical reasoning and awaken associations, emotions, and insights that cannot be summoned by logic alone. The mind may analyze a sentence, but it experiences a symbol. This is why myths remain powerful even when stripped of literal belief. Their patterns touch something older than our conscious understanding, resonating with the architecture of the soul. The Urantia Book makes deliberate use of symbolic framing to convey truths that might otherwise remain abstract. Its portrayal of the soul's ascent is not just a doctrinal outline of cosmic progression. It is an image of an eternal pilgrimage, each stage a threshold into greater light. The Gnostic metaphor of the divine spark hidden in matter serves a similar function. It compresses vast metaphysical claims into a single, vivid picture that can be carried in the heart. These images are not accidental ornaments. They're the truth's native clothing. In mystical traditions, the highest realities are often said to be ineffable, and so metaphor becomes not an optional flourish but a necessity. To describe the indescribable, one must speak in a way that points beyond itself. This is why the mystical function of metaphor is not merely decorative but transformative. A well-chosen image can shift perception in an instant, rearranging the way we see ourselves and our place in the world. When the Sufi poet Rumi speaks of the soul as a reed cut from the reed bed, longing for reunion, he is not explaining, he is invoking. The image bypasses the mind's defenses and awakens an ache of recognition, a memory of belonging we may have forgotten. In this sense, symbols and metaphors are not static signs, but living teachers. They do not hand us answers. They draw us into a relationship with mystery, a conversation that can last a lifetime. To learn the language of symbols is to enter a dialogue that transcends time and culture. It is to recognize that truth often arrives clothed in images, not to conceal itself, but to make itself more fully known. The lotus, the tree, the pilgrim, the spark. These are not merely remnants of an earlier, more primitive way of thinking. They're the scaffolding by which the human spirit reaches toward the ineffable. In the Urantia Book, as in the Gnostic texts, such imagery is a bridge between worlds, between the finite and the infinite, the seen and the unseen, the fact and the truth. When approached with reverence and discernment, a symbol can open a window onto realities that cannot be grasped in any other way. But symbols are alive only when we engage with them. To repeat an image without reflection is to leave its treasures unopened. To contemplate it, to carry it in meditation, to allow it to speak in dreams and quiet moments. This is to unlock its layered meanings, to let it work upon the heart as well as the mind. This process is deeply personal. No two people will receive exactly the same meaning from a given image, and yet the archetypal roots ensure that what we discover is never entirely our own. In this shared language, the private and the collective meet, and we are reminded that our search for meaning is both uniquely ours and part of a vast human inheritance. The journey through symbols and metaphor prepares us for a deeper kind of perception, one that listens not only to words and images, but to the subtle resonances beneath them. In the next chapter, we will turn our attention to the phenomenon of synchronicity, those moments when inner meaning and outer events align so precisely that they seem to speak the same language. For if symbols are the alphabet of the soul, then synchronicities may be its poetry, revealing that the universe itself sometimes speaks back. Chapter 9. The Science of the Soul. The soul is often spoken of as if it belongs entirely to the realm of mystery, immune to the reach of science, and untouched by the methods of observation and measurement. Yet there is a growing recognition, both in spiritual thought and in empirical research, that the soul's journey may leave traces in the world we can see, in the mind we can study, and even in the brain we can measure. The Urantia Book describes the soul as a Urantia reality, a transitional form of being that bridges the material and the spiritual, growing in response to moral choice and spiritual experience. It is not born fully formed, but develops over time, shaped by the interplay of divine influence and human decision. In this view, the soul is not an abstract possession, but a living entity in the process of becoming, as real as the body, yet made of a substance that belongs to another order of existence. This notion finds curious parallels in certain fields of modern study. Researchers investigating near-death experiences report that those who return often describe a continuity of awareness beyond the shutting down of the body, a vividness of perception and a sense of identity that transcends brain function. Some speak of encounters with light, with guiding presences, or with life reviews that unfold in a way both instantaneous and complete. While such accounts remain controversial, the sheer consistency of certain elements across cultures and ages has led even cautious scientists to wonder whether consciousness may persist in some form beyond death. In these accounts, the soul appears not as a metaphor, but as the traveler, carrying the essence of a person into states of being that are unfamiliar yet deeply recognizable. The Jesuit paleontologist and theologian Pierre Teilhard de Chardin offered his own vision of the soul's trajectory, imagining evolution as a process not only of increasing complexity, but of increasing consciousness, culminating in what he called the omega point, a state of ultimate unification with the divine, where every individual consciousness is gathered without losing its uniqueness. This is not a static paradise, but the fulfillment of a process that has been unfolding since the first stirrings of life. In Teilhard's view, the soul is not a passive passenger in this journey, but an active participant, shaping and being shaped by the vast currents of cosmic evolution. Here, the Urantia perspective and modern thought converge. Both see the soul as something dynamic, growing in response to experience and destined for integration with a larger whole. If the soul is a developing reality, then it is reasonable to expect that its growth might leave an imprint on the human mind and brain. Neuroscience, while not able to detect the soul directly, has begun to map how enduring spiritual practices, such as meditation, prayer, acts of compassion, and moral reflection, reshape the brain's structure and function. This phenomenon, known as neuroplasticity, reveals that the brain is not fixed after a certain age, but remains capable of creating new neural pathways in response to sustained intention and experience. Regions associated with empathy, emotional regulation, and self-awareness have been shown to grow denser and more interconnected in those who regularly engage in spiritual disciplines. Though science may not label these changes as soul growth, the correlation between the cultivation of inner life and the transformation of the brain is difficult to ignore. From a Urantia Book standpoint, such changes could be understood as the material reflection of a deeper Urantia process. The adjuster's work in guiding thought and shaping moral decisions may not directly alter neurons, but the choices and habits that result from such influence do. Each act of forgiveness, each decision to act with integrity, each moment spent in sincere contemplation strengthens the mental and emotional patterns that make us more receptive to further guidance. In this way, the physical brain and the evolving soul are in constant dialogue. The brain provides the instrument, the soul shapes the music, and the repeated playing refines the instrument further. The implication is profound. Spiritual growth is not only a matter of belief or intention, but a process that can be observed in the way we think, feel, and act, and perhaps even measured in the architecture of the brain. This does not reduce the soul to biology, any more than the light of a flame can be reduced to the candle that holds it. But it suggests that our time and material life is designed for integration. The development of the soul is intertwined with the transformation of the mind, so that by the time we leave the body, the soul carries with it the fruits of all it has learned, refined through the very substance of our human experience. To speak of the soul in both scientific and spiritual terms is not to confine it within the limits of measurement. but to recognize that truth often leaves footprints in more than one domain. The near-death experiencer, returning with a transformed outlook. The meditator whose compassion deepens over decades. The seeker whose moral convictions grow stronger through trial. All reveal patterns of growth that seem to be shaping something enduring. The Urantia Book describes the soul as carrying forward into the next life the moral and spiritual realities we have chosen in this one, while Teilhard's Omega Point places that journey within the grand arc of cosmic evolution. Whether we see it in terms of Urantia's substance or as the convergence of consciousness across time, the central truth is the same. The soul is not static. It expands, deepens, and becomes more itself through the experiences it lives. Science offers only glimpses of this process, but even those glimpses can inspire wonder. Brain scans may show the thickening of the cortex in those devoted to compassion. Psychology may chart the long-term well-being of those who live with purpose. But the essence of what changes is beyond the reach of any instrument. It is found in the way a person meets life after loss, in the humility born from struggle, in the joy that persists without cause. These are the marks of the soul's evolution, not visible under a microscope, yet evident to all who have eyes to see. And perhaps it is fitting that the soul resists final proof, for its reality is not meant to be reduced to fact alone, but to be lived into moment by moment. If the soul is both a participant in the universe's great unfolding and a vessel for eternal survival, then our task here is far more than survival itself. It is to grow something in ourselves that will outlast every circumstance, to cultivate an inner reality that can stand in any world. In the next chapter, we will look more closely at the conditions that nurture this growth, the environments, relationships, and choices that serve as soil for the soul's expansion. For though the journey is deeply personal, it is also shaped by the worlds we inhabit and by the love, challenge, and meaning we encounter along the way. Chapter 10, Time, Eternity, and the Now. Time is the measure by which we live our days, yet it is not a constant companion. Sometimes it rushes past us in a blur. Sometimes it stretches so wide that a single moment feels like an eternity. Physics tells us that this is not merely a trick of perception. Time itself is flexible. In Einstein's theory of relativity, time slows down as we approach the speed of light, stretching and bending under the influence of gravity. In the quantum realm, time behaves even more strangely. Events can be entangled in such a way that the usual order of before and after begins to blur. These scientific insights, while born of mathematics and experiment, open a door onto perspectives that mystics have been describing for centuries. That time, as we know it, is not the final truth, but a dimension of experience that can be transcended. The Urantia Book offers its own vision, speaking of the eternal now in which God exists, a reality that is not bound to past or future, where all that has been and all that will be are present in the fullness of divine awareness. In this view, our experience of time is a gift, a means of ordering growth and choice, but it is not the ultimate condition of existence. Our lives unfold within it, but our souls are destined to awaken into a state where time is no longer a river carrying us away, but a still ocean in which all moments exist together. This concept is difficult for the mind to grasp, yet sometimes in moments of deep prayer, meditation, or awe, we catch a glimpse of it, a sense that we are held in something timeless, that the present moment is somehow touching infinity. Psychology finds a bridge to this idea in the study of flow states, those rare intervals when we're so deeply engaged in what we're doing that our usual sense of time fades. An artist painting, a dancer lost in movement, a a scientist immersed in discovery. In such moments, hours can pass like minutes, or minutes can feel vast and complete. The boundaries between self and action dissolve, and what remains is an unbroken presence. These experiences may not be the eternal now in its fullness, but they echo its qualities. The suspension of past and future, the unity of awareness and activity, the quiet joy of simply being where we are. It is as if the soul, in these moments, remembers something of its native state and invites the mind to join it there, if only briefly. Mystics across ages have spoken of the present moment not as a fleeting point between past and future, but as the only true gateway to eternity. Jacob Boehme, the 17th century mystic cobbler, wrote of a stillness in which time ceases to spin, a center where the soul meets God outside of the clock's dominion. Angelus Silesius, in his concise and enigmatic verses, declared, "Eternity is now or never," reminding us that what we seek in the endless stretch of time is already available in the immediacy of presence. These were not philosophical abstractions for them, but living experiences born of contemplative silence and a radical attention to the here and now. When they spoke of eternity, they spoke of a quality of awareness, not a measure of duration. Even outside explicitly religious traditions, poets and thinkers have glimpsed this truth. The little-known American poet Jones Very described the eternal moment as the deep hush before the dawn that never ends, an image that captures both the anticipation and the completeness of timelessness. Russian philosopher Nikolai Berdyaev saw eternity not as a static realm, but as a dynamic, creative state in which time's limitations are overcome by the soul's participation in divine freedom. These reflections echo what the Urantia Book intimates, that eternity is not an infinite extension of time, but something categorically different, a dimension where beginning and end lose meaning because all is held in perfect simultaneity. The mystical encounter with eternity often comes unbidden, in moments when the world suddenly feels weightless and luminous, when a mind stops reaching forward or backward and simply abides. Such experiences can happen in the midst of stillness or motion, in prayer, or in the simplest acts of life. They reveal that the now, fully entered, is not a fragment of time, but the whole of it. The past is contained within it. The future grows from it, and yet it belongs to neither. In these moments, we are reminded that the eternal is not elsewhere. It is hidden in plain sight, waiting to be discovered in the only place it can ever be lived. Time, then, is both our teacher and our illusion. It shapes our journey, marking the sequence of growth and choice. Yet it also conceals from us the larger reality in which all moments are held together. Physics hints at this with its relativistic landscapes and quantum strangeness. Mysticism affirms it with a witness of the eternal now. Psychology offers glimpses of it in the altered perception of flow. The Urantia Book brings these strands into a unified vision, reminding us that time is not the enemy of eternity, but its servant, giving us the gift of movement and decision while gently leading us toward a state in which such measures are no longer necessary. To live with this awareness is to step into a different relationship with our days. The clock still ticks, seasons still pass, and responsibilities still demand their attention. But something within us ceases to be hurried. The present moment becomes more than a passage. It becomes a dwelling place. Even as we work and plan, we remember that our truest life is not bound to the calendar. We begin to treat time as a canvas, not a cage, using its fleeting nature to paint with greater care, knowing that the strokes we make here are carried into the timelessness that awaits us. This way of living is not escapism. It is the opposite, a deeper immersion in life because we no longer see each moment as disposable. And yet, the eternal now does not merely belong to solitary contemplation. It has implications for how we connect with one another. If eternity is not far away but interwoven with every instant, then every meeting between souls is an eternal event, carrying a weight that goes beyond circumstance. In the chapters ahead, we will turn toward the bonds that link us across time and space, exploring how relationships, both earthly and spiritual, participate in a web of connection that hints at the structure of eternity itself. For as much as the now belongs to each of us inwardly, it is also the meeting ground where our lives touch and transform one another forever. Chapter 11, Spiritual Ecology. To understand our place in the cosmos is also to understand our place upon the earth, for no vision of eternity can be whole if it ignores the ground on which we stand. The Urantia Book frames planetary progress not only as a matter of technological advancement or social organization, but as the unfolding of a spiritual plan in which the material world is a vital participant. Earth, Urantia, is not a stage to be discarded once the soul moves beyond it, but a living part of the divine architecture entrusted to our care for the sake of those who will follow. The destinies of soul and planet are bound together. As we grow in wisdom and compassion, we are meant to reflect that growth in the way we treat the world that has nurtured us. The story of humanity is inseparable from the story of Earth itself, and both are chapters in a larger cosmic book. This truth finds an echo in the Gaia theory, which envisions the planet as a self-regulating, living system, each of its parts, from the deepest ocean currents to the thinnest air at the edge of space, in constant dialogue. In this view, the biosphere is not just a collection of organisms competing for survival, but a vast network of relationships that together maintain the conditions for life. It is not a far leap from the scientific model to the idea of biosphere consciousness. The sense that the Earth itself participates in a form of awareness, perhaps not like ours, but real enough to sense and respond to the balance of its own systems. If such a consciousness exists, then our actions as a species are not simply environmental interventions. They are part of an ongoing conversation with the planet's own life. Forgotten visionaries like Jean Michel saw this connection in ways both practical and mystical, envisioning a world where human settlements were aligned with the natural energies of the land, where sacred geometry and landscape were woven together in harmony. To Michel, the Earth was not merely a resource, but a sacred partner, and its patterns in rivers, hills, and even the alignments of ancient monuments were signs of a deeper unity between humanity and the planet. In a world where the language of progress often excludes such reverence, his voice reminds us that stewardship is not merely an environmental duty, it is a spiritual calling. To care for the Earth is to participate in its unfolding story, to recognize that the health of the planet and the health of the soul are part of the same living system. To care for the Earth is to practice an ethic that reaches beyond convenience or obligation. It is to live with the awareness that every action leaves an imprint, not only on the soil and air, but on the shared spiritual fabric of life. The ethics of care, when rooted in spiritual responsibility, transforms environmental preservation from a technical challenge into a sacred trust. It asks us not only to avoid harm, but to act in ways that enhance the life of the whole. To see ourselves as participants in a system where generosity toward the planet is a form of generosity toward ourselves and all who will inherit it. From the Urantia Book's perspective, such stewardship is not optional. A world that advances spiritually without tending to its physical home creates an imbalance that eventually limits the growth of its inhabitants. Planetary progress requires that the care of the Earth and the care of the soul advance together, each reinforcing the other. The Gaia perspective strengthens this vision by framing human beings not as rulers of the planet, but as one expression of its unfolding life. Our technologies, cultures, and decisions ripple through the biosphere in the same way a river carves a valley or a forest enriches the air. The difference is that we have the capacity to act with foresight, to choose whether our impact will heal or harm. This capacity is both a gift and a test of our maturity. To act as if the Earth's well-being is separate from our own is to fail that test. To act as if its flourishing is intertwined with our destiny is to step into the role we were created to fill. Forgotten ecological thinkers like Michel remind us that such stewardship is not new, nor is it bound to modern environmental movements alone. Ancient cultures often embedded ecological wisdom into their myths, rituals, and city plans, recognizing that harmony with the land was essential for survival and spiritual balance alike. By recovering and reinterpreting these ways of knowing, we can begin to see our relationship with the Earth not as a burden, but as a source of meaning. Each act of restoration, planting a tree, cleaning a river, protecting a habitat, becomes a form of prayer, a gesture of alignment with the Creator's intention for the planet. In this way, ecology becomes not just science or policy, but liturgy, the ongoing worship of life through the care of the world that sustains it. When we begin to see the Earth as part of our spiritual family, the idea of stewardship changes from duty to devotion. The rivers become more than water. They are the veins of a living body. The forests are not just resources. They are lungs that breathe alongside our own. The soil is not mere dirt. It is the memory of the planet, holding the stories of life that came before us and nourishing the life yet to come. The Urantia Book affirms that every world is entrusted to its inhabitants for a time, and that part of our spiritual education is to learn how to return it in better condition than we found it. This responsibility is not meant to weigh us down, but to lift us into a deeper relationship with creation, reminding us that we are co-creators in the unfolding beauty of the planet's story. In this light, environmental action becomes a mirror of spiritual growth. A person who has cultivated compassion for other human beings will find it natural to extend that compassion to other forms of life. A society that values truth and goodness will seek to align its use of resources with the long-term health of the whole. This is not idealism divorced from reality, but the recognition that our survival, both physical and spiritual, is interwoven with the survival of the ecosystems we inhabit. The health of the soul and the health of the earth are not separate journeys. They rise or fall together. As we turn our attention to the next chapter, the focus will shift from the living body of the earth to the living body of humanity, the ways in which individuals and cultures can heal the fractures within themselves and with each other. For just as a planet must maintain balance among its systems to thrive, so too must humanity learn to reconcile its divisions, building harmony within its own kind. This movement from ecological harmony to human harmony is not a change in subject, but the continuation of the same truth. All life is connected, and the care we offer one part inevitably touches the whole. Chapter 12, The Fractal Self. If the Earth is a living body and the cosmos a living mind, then the self is their echo in miniature, a world within a world carrying the same patterns that shape galaxies, rivers, and civilizations. The ancient Hermetic teaching, as above, so below, points to this correspondence, suggesting that the structure of the whole is reflected in the smallest parts, and that to know oneself deeply is, in some measure, to know the universe. Modern science offers intriguing metaphors for this truth in holographic models of reality, where each fragment contains the full image, only in reduced scale. In this way, consciousness itself can be seen as holographic, every human being carrying, in unique configuration, the full spectrum of possibility that belongs to the larger order of existence. The Urantia Book approaches this mystery through its teaching on personality, a quality that is unrepeatable, bestowed by the Universal Father, and unlike anything else in creation. Personality is not merely the sum of traits, memories, and habits. It is the organizing principle that unifies these elements into a single, continuous self. It is both utterly individual and yet tuned to resonate with the universal, like a note that is distinct but harmonious within a greater symphony. This makes each person a microcosm, a distinct reflection of cosmic reality that will never occur again in the same form. When we begin to see ourselves this way, our inner work takes on a larger dimension. Every act of self-discovery, every integration of conflicting parts, is also a way of aligning with the architecture of the whole. In psychology, the work of integration often begins by acknowledging that the self is not a single, uniform entity, but a collection of parts, roles, voices, and patterns shaped by life's experiences. Some of these parts move easily in harmony. Others carry wounds or memories that resist the larger flow. The fractal view of the self invites us to see these parts not as flaws to be erased, but as smaller patterns within the greater design, each with something essential to contribute once brought into balance. Just as ecosystems thrive through the diversity of their elements, the inner world thrives when its parts are honored, understood, and harmonized under the guidance of the whole personality. In this way, self-integration becomes both a psychological and a spiritual act, reflecting in miniature the harmony toward which the universe itself is moving. To imagine the self as a fractal is to accept that the patterns shaping our inner life are not isolated from the patterns that govern the cosmos. Just as the spiral of a galaxy echoes in the curve of a seashell, the movement of our thoughts and emotions can mirror the great cycles of creation and return. The holographic model of consciousness extends this idea further, suggesting that every individual carries, in potential, the whole of human experience, that within the vast architecture of reality, the totality is present in each part. This means that the personal journey of integration and growth is not merely for the sake of the individual. It participates in the evolution of the greater whole. Each healed wound, each act of understanding contributes to the healing of the larger pattern, just as a single cell's health supports the vitality of an entire organism. The Urantia Book's emphasis on the uniqueness of personality deepens this perspective. While the patterns of the whole may be present in each of us, they are refracted through a one-of-a-kind lens that will never exist again. This unrepeatable quality is not an accident, but a deliberate act of divine creativity, ensuring that every person adds something irreplaceable to the cosmic mosaic. The work of self-integration, then, is not about becoming generic or dissolving individuality into the collective, but about refining and clarifying the singular note we are meant to contribute to the universe's song. In this light, spiritual destiny is not a journey away from ourselves, but a journey into the fullness of what we already are. Psychologically, this path demands the courage to meet the fragmented parts of the self without fear or rejection. The inner critic, the wounded child, the guarded protector. These and other aspects may seem at odds with the harmony we seek, yet each holds a piece of truth, a fragment of the greater design. Integration does not mean erasing these voices, but weaving them into a coherent whole, where each is acknowledged and given its rightful place. In the fractal self, nothing is wasted. Even the most difficult experiences become threads in the pattern, contributing depth, texture, and resilience. This is how the inner universe grows in complexity without losing its unity, mirroring the very process by which the outer universe unfolds. To live as a fractal self is to recognize that our smallest choices ripple outward, shaping not only our own destiny, but the destiny of the greater whole. Each moment of clarity illuminates a wider horizon. Each act of compassion sends an echo through the unseen web of life. The Urantia Book reminds us that personality is endowed with the capacity for eternal growth, meaning that the harmonization of the self is not a temporary achievement, but the foundation for an endless unfolding. As we integrate the many parts of our being, we become more transparent to the divine image we were meant to reflect. And in doing so, we align ourselves more deeply with the universal design of which we are a part. This perspective reshapes our understanding of responsibility. If we truly carry the pattern of the whole within us, then the care we take in tending to our own inner balance becomes a form of service to the cosmos. Every reconciliation between inner conflicts is a small rehearsal for the reconciliation of greater divisions in the world. Every truth we welcome into our own lives makes us more capable of embodying truth in our relationships, communities, and planet. The fractal self is thus not a private reality, but a bridge between the personal and the cosmic, a reminder that the work of inner transformation is inseparable from the work of universal harmony. In the chapters ahead, this bridge will carry us into the realm of spiritual experience itself, the ways in which the self encounters, absorbs, and is transformed by the presence of the divine. For if we are microcosms of the universe, then the meeting between the human soul and the infinite is not an external event, but the blossoming of something already seated within. We turn now to the landscapes of direct encounter with the divine, where the inner and outer universes merge into a single, living reality. Chapter 13, Angels, Allies, and Unseen Realities. The universe we see is only a fraction of the one we inhabit, beyond the reach of our senses, yet woven intimately into the fabric of our lives. There are presences that act, observe, and respond in ways that most of us only dimly perceive. The Urantia Book lays out a vast hierarchy of celestial beings, from seraphim and midway creatures to higher orders whose scope of responsibility extends across planets, systems, and beyond. These are not distant abstractions, but living personalities, each with a role in the vast coordination of cosmic life. Guardian angels, as described in Urantia teachings, are appointed to guide human souls, not by overriding free will, but by influencing circumstances, thoughts, and opportunities toward the growth and survival of the soul. In this vision, human life unfolds not in isolation, but in a field of intelligent care, part of a cooperative endeavor between the seen and unseen. Modern angelology, though often simplified in popular imagination, contains echoes of this structured vision. Many contemporary accounts portray angels not as ethereal ornaments of faith, but as purposeful presences whose interventions can be subtle or startling. Alongside theological interpretations, interdimensional theories have emerged, proposing that such beings may inhabit layers of reality that intersect with ours in ways science is only beginning to imagine. Concepts from quantum physics, parallel dimensions, non-locality, fields beyond the limits of ordinary perception, are sometimes invoked to frame how these interactions might occur without violating the natural order. Whether one approaches them from faith or theory, the suggestion remains that human life is threaded through with influences from realms that exist alongside our own. Paranormal research adds its own patchwork of testimony. From credible reports of apparitions at moments of crisis to carefully investigated cases of verifiable information received under extraordinary circumstances, there are patterns that defy easy dismissal. While much remains unexplained, these accounts share a consistent theme. The human story is not played out on a single stage. We live within a larger theater, with unseen actors whose presence is sometimes felt as protection, sometimes as warning, sometimes simply as a quiet companionship in moments of solitude. Belief shapes how these encounters are interpreted, but the raw fact of them, their frequency, their emotional depth, their transformative impact, suggests that the boundary between our world and the unseen is far more permeable than most imagine. Belief is not merely an opinion held in the mind. It is a lens that shapes perception, determining which elements of reality we notice, interpret, and integrate into our lives. A person who believes in the possibility of unseen guidance may recognize patterns of protection or encouragement where another sees only coincidence. This is not to say that belief creates the beings themselves, but rather that it opens channels of attention through which their influence can be perceived. The Urantia Book suggests that celestial beings often work without overt recognition, and a human receptivity, shaped by trust, faith, and moral alignment, increases the effectiveness of their ministry. Just as a seed requires the right soil to grow, the subtle work of unseen allies is most fruitful where the mind and heart are prepared to receive it. In psychological terms, this readiness might be compared to the phenomenon of selective attention. We filter the overwhelming flood of sensory information according to what we consider relevant, and in doing so, we construct our personal experience of the world. Applied to spiritual perception, this means that an open, expectant orientation may lead us to notice moments of improbable timing, sudden insight, or a sense of companionship in solitude, experiences that someone without that framework might ignore. In this way, belief becomes an instrument for tuning our awareness to the possibility of the unseen, much like a radio that can only receive the stations it is set to detect. Yet there is also a reciprocal relationship here. Experiences of the unseen can reshape belief, just as belief can prepare us for those experiences. Many who have reported encounters with angelic or interdimensional presences describe a permanent shift in worldview afterward, regardless of whether they sought such an encounter beforehand. This suggests that the relationship between human consciousness and the unseen realm is dynamic, evolving through an interplay of openness, experience, and interpretation. Whether through direct perception or the subtle accumulation of meaningful coincidences, those who remain attentive often come to sense that they are participants in a network of care and influence larger than they had imagined, one in which they are not passive recipients, but active partners. To live with awareness of unseen realities is not to withdraw from the tangible world, but to inhabit it more fully, knowing that its surface is only the first layer of a vast and living structure. The Urantia Book's portrayal of celestial hierarchies offers one possible map of this territory, where every human soul is accompanied by allies whose mission is to foster growth, protect potential, and prepare us for the larger life to come. Modern accounts of angelic encounters, interdimensional presences, and inexplicable interventions may differ in language and imagery, yet they carry the same essential intuition, that we are not alone in our journey, and that the forces walking beside us are invested in the outcome of our story. The fractal self is thus not a private reality, but a bridge between the personal and the cosmic, a reminder that the work of inner transformation is inseparable from the work of universal harmony. In the chapters ahead, this bridge will carry us into the realm of spiritual experience itself, the ways in which the self encounters, absorbs, and is transformed by the presence of the divine. For if we are microcosms of the universe, then the meeting between the human soul and the infinite is not an external event, but the blossoming of something already seated within. We turn now to the landscapes of direct encounter with the divine, where the inner and outer universes merge into a single, living reality. Chapter 13, Angels, Allies, and Unseen Realities. The universe we see is only a fraction of the one we inhabit, beyond the reach of our senses, yet woven intimately into the fabric of our lives. There are presences that act, observe, and respond in ways that most of us only dimly perceive. The Urantia Book lays out a vast hierarchy of celestial beings, from seraphim and midway creatures to higher orders whose scope of responsibility extends across planets, systems, and beyond. These are not distant abstractions, but living personalities, each with a role in the vast coordination of cosmic life. Guardian angels, as described in Urantia teachings, are appointed to guide human souls, not by overriding free will, but by influencing circumstances, thoughts, and opportunities toward the growth and survival of the soul. In this vision, human life unfolds not in isolation, but in a field of intelligent care, part of a cooperative endeavor between the seen and unseen. Modern angelology, though often simplified in popular imagination, contains echoes of this structured vision. Many contemporary accounts portray angels not as ethereal ornaments of faith, but as purposeful presences whose interventions can be subtle or startling. Alongside theological interpretations, interdimensional theories have emerged, proposing that such beings may inhabit layers of reality that intersect with ours in ways science is only beginning to imagine. Concepts from quantum physics, parallel dimensions, non-locality, fields beyond the limits of ordinary perception, are sometimes invoked to frame how these interactions might occur without violating the natural order. Whether one approaches them from faith or theory, the suggestion remains that human life is threaded through with influences from realms that exist alongside our own. Paranormal research adds its own patchwork of testimony. From credible reports of apparitions at moments of crisis to carefully investigated cases of verifiable information received under extraordinary circumstances, there are patterns that defy easy dismissal. While much remains unexplained, these accounts share a consistent theme. The human story is not played out on a single stage. We live within a larger theater, with unseen actors whose presence is sometimes felt as protection, sometimes as warning, sometimes simply as a quiet companionship in moments of solitude. Belief shapes how these encounters are interpreted, but the raw fact of them, their frequency, their emotional depth, their transformative impact, suggests that the boundary between our world and the unseen is far more permeable than most imagine. Belief is not merely an opinion held in the mind. It is a lens that shapes perception, determining which elements of reality we notice, interpret, and integrate into our lives. A person who believes in the possibility of unseen guidance may recognize patterns of protection or encouragement where another sees only coincidence. This is not to say that belief creates the beings themselves, but rather that it opens channels of attention through which their influence can be perceived. The Urantia Book suggests that celestial beings often work without overt recognition, and a human receptivity shaped by trust, faith, and moral alignment. increases the effectiveness of their ministry. Just as a seed requires the right soil to grow, the subtle work of unseen allies is most fruitful where the mind and heart are prepared to receive it. In psychological terms, this readiness might be compared to the phenomenon of selective attention. We filter the overwhelming flood of sensory information according to what we consider relevant, and in doing so, we construct our personal experience of the world. Applied to spiritual perception, this means that an open, expectant orientation may lead us to notice moments of improbable timing, sudden insight, or a sense of companionship and solitude, experiences that someone without that framework might ignore. In this way, belief becomes an instrument for tuning our awareness to the possibility of the unseen, much like a radio that can only receive the stations it is set to detect. Yet there is also a reciprocal relationship here. Experiences of the unseen can reshape belief, just as belief can prepare us for those experiences. Many who have reported encounters with angelic or interdimensional presences describe a permanent shift in worldview afterward, regardless of whether they sought such an encounter beforehand. This suggests that the relationship between human consciousness and the unseen realm is dynamic, evolving through an interplay of openness, experience, and interpretation. Whether through direct perception or the subtle accumulation of meaningful coincidences, those who remain attentive often come to sense that they are participants in a network of care and influence larger than they had imagined, one in which they are not passive recipients, but active partners. To live with awareness of unseen realities is not to withdraw from the tangible world, but to inhabit it more fully, knowing that its surface is only the first layer of a vast and living structure. The Urantia Book's portrayal of celestial hierarchies offers one possible map of this territory, where every human soul is accompanied by allies whose mission is to foster growth, protect potential, and prepare us for the larger life to come. Modern accounts of angelic encounters, interdimensional presences, and inexplicable interventions may differ in language and imagery, yet they carry the same essential intuition, that we are not alone in our journey, and that the forces walking beside us are invested in the outcome of our story. The great synthesis, when lived rather than merely contemplated, becomes a force that reshapes both the individual and the collective. A society that honors the precision of science, the depth of philosophy, and the compassion of spirituality in equal measure would no longer see these as rival paths, but as converging streams feeding the same river of human progress. Decisions about technology would be guided by ethical foresight. Laws and governance would be rooted in the recognition of shared human dignity. Education would cultivate not only intellect, but character and empathy. This is not an unreachable utopia, but a trajectory, one that begins in the mind and heart of each person who chooses to live integratively, letting the harmony they create within themselves spill outward into the systems and communities they inhabit. From a Urantia Book's perspective, such integration aligns with the universe's own pattern of growth, where diverse elements are brought into ever greater unity without losing their distinct identity. Just as the cosmos weaves together energy, matter, and spirit, the human journey calls us to weave together knowledge, meaning, and value. This is not a demand for uniformity, but for harmony, a symphony in which each note retains its uniqueness while contributing to the whole. In this sense, the great synthesis is less about the end of a search than about the skill of living in a state of continual integration, where new discoveries, new challenges, and new experiences are constantly drawn into the service of a coherent and purposeful life. As we move to the final chapter, our attention will turn to the question that has been quietly pulsing beneath every page. How does this integrated vision prepare us for the life beyond this one? For if the synthesis of science, philosophy, and spirituality is the art of living well here, it may also be the preparation for living well in the worlds to come. The journey has brought us from the whispers of ancient connection to the edge of eternity. Now we will step forward into the final exploration, a meditation on destiny, continuity, and the soul's unending adventure. Chapter 15, The Path Ahead. To stand at the threshold of the future with an awakened sense of our place in the cosmos is both a privilege and a responsibility. The Urantia Book reminds us that life on this world is not an isolated chapter, but a vital part of an eternal narrative, and that our actions here contribute to the shaping of that larger story. The path ahead calls for more than mere belief. It asks for a deliberate way of living that reflects our awareness of being participants in a design far greater than ourselves. Personal spiritual practice becomes the foundation of this participation, not as a rigid discipline, but as a living rhythm woven into the fabric of daily life. In a modern age, this might mean moments of quiet reflection in the midst of urban noise, a morning of gratitude before the day's demands begin, or a conscious pause before making decisions, allowing the deeper compass within to guide the next step. These practices are not escape routes from the world, but points of entry into it, helping us to engage more fully with life's demands and opportunities. In every tradition and at every time, those who have walked this path have discovered that the inner life and the outer life cannot be separated without both losing their vitality. A spiritual practice that does not touch the way we speak to others, spend our resources, or meet conflict is a seed never planted. Likewise, activism or engagement without the grounding of an inner life can become frantic and brittle, easily broken under the weight of challenges. The path ahead asks for both, an inward anchor that holds steady through uncertainty and an outward expression that brings that stability into the world. At the heart of this path is the understanding that spiritual growth is not measured in private insights alone, but in the ways love and service begin to shape our actions. Service, in this sense, is not merely a task or obligation, but an orientation, a readiness to recognize and respond to the needs around us, whether they belong to a stranger, a community, or the planet itself. Love is the animating force of this service, not sentimental or passive, but active and resilient, able to meet hardship without withdrawing. To walk forward as conscious participants in the cosmic design is to let love and service become the natural outflow of our inner life, until they are not separate from who we are, but the truest expression of it. The path ahead will not be free from uncertainty, for uncertainty is woven into the very fabric of human life. Yet uncertainty need not be the enemy of peace. It can be the soil in which resilience grows. Resilience is not the hard shell of denial, but the supple strength that allows us to bend without breaking, to adapt without losing our center. It comes from knowing that we are part of something larger than the immediate moment, that our worth and purpose are not diminished by temporary setbacks or unanswered questions. The Urantia Book offers the assurance that the universe is ultimately friendly to those who choose truth, and this trust allows us to step forward even when the way ahead is unclear. Such trust is not naive optimism, but a disciplined openness, the willingness to move without complete control, confident that each step will reveal the next. In living this way, we begin to experience life less as a solitary effort and more as a shared creation. The divine is not a distant architect who completes the design alone, but a partner inviting us into the work of shaping both our own souls and the worlds around us. Co-creation with the divine does not always come in the form of grand visions or dramatic interventions. It is just as often found in the quiet shaping of relationships, the patient cultivation of virtues, the consistent choosing of what is true and good over what is merely expedient. This partnership transforms even the most ordinary acts into part of a cosmic unfolding. A kindness offered, a truth spoken, a wrong forgiven becomes a thread in the vast tapestry of the universe's becoming. There is joy in this work, a joy that is not dependent on constant ease or visible success. It is the joy of alignment, the sense of being in step with the deep current that moves through all life. This joy sustains effort without strain, turning service into something more than duty, into a natural expression of who we have become. It does not deny sorrow or hardship, but neither does it allow them to have the final word. In co-creation with the divine, we discover that the path ahead is not merely a road to walk, but a living relationship to be nurtured, one in which we are both the travelers and the builders, shaping the way even as we follow it. To walk the path ahead as a conscious participant in the cosmic design is to live with the steady awareness that life is more than a sequence of events. It is a dialogue between the finite and the infinite. Our daily choices, however small, are responses to a larger invitation to shape ourselves into beings who can reflect truth, radiate love, and serve in ways that extend far beyond our present horizon. This path does not demand perfection, for perfection belongs to eternity, but it calls for sincerity, for the willingness to keep turning toward the highest we can see, and to keep walking even when the terrain is steep or shadowed. In the rhythm of such a life, personal spiritual practice becomes the heartbeat, love and service become the breath, and resilience becomes the steady stride that carries us forward. The joy of co-creation infuses each moment with meaning, reminding us that our labor is not in vain, even when results are slow to appear. We begin to see the evidence of our partnership with the divine, not in dramatic revelations alone, but in the quiet transformation of character, in the deepening of peace, and in the widening of compassion that naturally embraces more and more of the world. In this way, the path ahead is not something to reach someday. It is already here, unfolding beneath our feet with every step we take in awareness and trust. And so we arrive at the threshold of the final meditation, the epilogue, where the strands of this journey will be gathered into a single, luminous thread. We will look back on the path that has brought us from the first whispers of the infinite to this place of conscious participation, and forward into the horizon that lies beyond the veil of this life. For the journey does not end here. It only changes form, leading us onward into the wider reaches of the adventure for which we have been preparing all along. In the vast expanse of the universe, where galaxies spin in silent arcs and stars are born in clouds of fire, it can be tempting to see ourselves as small, almost incidental. And yet, the deeper truth is that we are not merely passengers in this cosmic voyage. We are co-creators, entrusted with the shaping of our own souls and the worlds they touch. The Urantia Book assures us that each personality is a unique and irreplaceable expression of the divine intent, and that our lives, however brief they may seem against the backdrop of eternity, are woven into the very fabric of the universal story. To live with this awareness is to recognize that our thoughts, choices, and acts of love are not lost in the immensity. They ripple outward, adding color and depth to the unfolding design. The future of humanity will not be decided by chance alone, but by the degree to which we awaken to this co-creative role. In a universe that is both quantum and spiritual, possibility is not fixed, is shaped by participation. Just as the observer in physics influences the reality they measure, so too do we, as observers and participants in life, help to call forth the realities we will inhabit. Every act of integrity strengthens the field in which truth can flourish. Every moment of compassion adds weight to the balance of goodness in the human story. The great powers of the cosmos are not only in distant stars, but in the unseen decisions made each day by souls willing to align themselves with the highest they can imagine. Hope, in this light, is not mere optimism. It is an act of alignment. It is the choice to place our trust in the ultimate goodness of the universe, even when present circumstances offer little reassurance. Hope opens the mind to solutions not yet visible and strengthens the heart to endure until they appear. It connects us to the creative current that flows from the source through all living things, reminding us that the future is not a destination we wait to reach, but a reality we are building with every thought and every step. In carrying hope, we carry light, not a light borrowed from elsewhere, but the flame kindled within us, meant to be tended, shared, and kept alive through the long night until the dawn breaks. To carry this light is to understand that the journey of the soul is never solitary. Even when we walk in silence, we are part of a procession that stretches across generations, cultures, and worlds yet unseen. The Urantia Book reminds us that the destinies of individuals and civilizations are intertwined, that the spiritual progress of one can become a seed for the transformation of many. In this sense, living consciously is itself a form of service, not only to those whose lives we directly touch, but to the unfolding story of humanity as a whole. Every gesture of kindness, every choice to act with integrity, every refusal to yield to fear sends a signal into the shared field of life, encouraging others to step forward in courage and compassion. This awareness reframes our responsibilities. We are not here simply to survive or to accumulate, but to contribute to the momentum of the good, the true, and the beautiful. Service becomes not a burden, but a privilege, for it is the way in which our finite lives participate in the infinite purpose. In the quantum spiritual universe we inhabit, even the smallest act can have consequences far beyond its immediate reach. A word of encouragement might alter the trajectory of a life. An act of justice might set in motion a chain of changes that ripple outward through communities and time. To live as a co-creator with God is to trust that our efforts, however small, are never lost. They are absorbed into the larger design, where nothing of value is ever wasted. And so, the call is not to grand gestures alone, but to a sustained way of being that reflects our highest values in the midst of the ordinary. The future is shaped as much by the quiet fidelity of those who live in truth day after day, as it is by the bold visions of those who dream on a global scale. In both, the same light burns, the commitment to align our lives with the creative intention of the universe. When we choose to live this way, we join a lineage of souls across time who have carried the torch forward, ensuring that its flame will not be extinguished, but will continue to illuminate the path for those yet to come. The path we walk does not end at the edge of this life. It opens into horizons we cannot yet imagine. The Urantia Book speaks of worlds upon worlds, realms where the soul continues to learn, serve, and grow in an ever-widening relationship with the Source. Death is not a wall, but a doorway, and what lies beyond is not a fading into nothingness, but a continuation, the next chapter of the same great story, written in a language of light. The progress we make here is not left behind. It travels with us, the character we have formed becoming the vessel we carry into eternity. Every lesson learned, every truth embraced. Every act of love offered is stored in the soul as treasure, ready to be unfolded in the greater life ahead. To live with this awareness is to be liberated from the tyranny of urgency and fear. It is to understand that while the time we have in this world is precious, it is not our only opportunity. The journey is patient, stretching across ages and worlds, and yet the present moment still matters infinitely, for it is here, in the small arena of daily choices, that we lay the foundation for what comes next. The light we carry now is the light we will bring into the next stage of our adventure, and the way we tend it here will shape its brilliance there. In this way, eternity is not an abstract hope, but a living reality, beginning in every conscious breath, every act of trust, every step taken toward the good. And so the final call is not to wait for the future, but to live it now, to be a participant in the divine design with the gifts and opportunities we already hold. This is the invitation that has run like a current beneath every page, to awaken, to align, and to act in harmony with the source, knowing that we are never alone in this work. The journey continues beyond the final page, into landscapes we cannot yet see, but toward which we are already moving. May the light you carry guide you there, and may it grow brighter with every step until it joins the great radiance in which all paths meet and all stories find their home. And if you enjoyed this content, please comment where you're from, share it with the people you love, and subscribe to the channel. Every day we bring you new videos to nourish the soul. Gratitude.